My next guest is Leroy Slanzi. He is an experienced educator with a remarkable 25-year career in education. As an author, he penned the influential book, Emotional Schools, delving into the importance of emotional intelligence and mental health in the education system. Leroy also excels as a facilitator of professional development sessions and has been on numerous podcasts and is a sought-after keynote speaker, helps parents, teachers, and schools through the chaos life brings. And he is a principal at the elementary school currently and has been a principal at all levels. Well, welcome to the podcast, Leroy.
Thank you for having me, Dana. I appreciate it.
Well, I'm excited to dive into the talk about emotional intelligence and why that's needed in our schools now more than ever. But we'll start off with a question I ask everybody. Tell me about a time when you were in the trenches and managed to crawl out.
Boy, I think, for me, it was about a year and a half ago. I was working for a school district, and it became incredibly difficult to do my job because of the bureaucracy that was going on above me. And then, dealing with two different unions at the same time. And there was this tension between the board and the district and the union. And I was caught in the middle. And the hard part with that is that because as a principal up here in British Columbia, Canada, we're not part of a union. We're part of an association. We're not part of the district team either. We're just these true middle managers, I guess you can say. And, at the time, the district was just making some god awful decisions, and just people who haven't been in the trenches in 15 years trying to weigh in on what should be going on in the classrooms. And the more I, fought for the teachers, it became, oh, you're trying to be a unionist. It's like, no, I'm not part of it being a unionist. I'm talking with common sense. I'm talking about what I see every day in the classroom. And, and honestly, I think you and I had a conversation about, attrition and people leaving the school and leaving different jobs. I finally just thought, you know what, I can't keep going with the school district when they can't think outside the box, when they maintain the same methods and practices that they've maintained. Because I was in the school district for about 16 years, and I just, after COVID, and then our community actually had a major flood, so our school got flooded. So right after we came back from COVID, we were shut down for another 4 or 5 months. And and so I got to that point where another opportunity came to work at an Indigenous school here. So in Canada, we have schools that are on reservations, and pay was the same, the benefits were the same, except there was no middle management. So all the dollars went into this, all the dollars go into the school, and they don't go to the people at the board office. So my budget is massive. I make the same amount of money, I'm happier, and I'm learning about Indigenous culture at the same time. So I finally had to leave. And I think that's one of the messages that I want to send today is when you're stuck in the trenches nowadays, guess what, teachers, we're free agents and we can go. Right. And so, over the 16, 17 years of being an administrator, there's lots of times where I was in the trenches, and it seems like every day you're in the trenches for whatever reason, right? It could be over kids going to the cafeteria during class time when they're not supposed to. And, so there's all kinds of things that happen, but that was a big one for me last year, where I actually resigned from the school district and went worked for and I'm now working for an independent school. So yeah, that was a tough one.
Yeah, but like you said, I think it's really knowing now, like what you need to do. And it might take a couple of years, but knowing when it's time to leave and what can make you happier, like you said, the pay is the same. You're not stuck with that middle manager, and you're able to thrive learning about Indigenous people more. So yeah, it's a win-win.
It truly is a win-win. And the real kicker is that I do a lot of professional development, and I go and I do a lot of workshops, and I work with schools all over the place. And the one school district that never had me do any workshops was my own.
Yeah.
It's like they weren't proud of, and I didn't finish my book until I left, because I had to get into the right emotional state of mind after being in that chaos. And that's what allowed me to finish my book. But it was just, it seems like the more I talk to people that, the more they're with a certain school district, you're taken for granted a little bit. Right. And And so, yeah, no, it was a very good move personally and professionally for me.
Well, let's talk about your school. So, or your book. Let's talk about what
Sure.
inspired you to write the book, Emotional Schools, and really exploring the topic of mental health in schools. So we'll talk about that first, like just the inspiration piece and
Yeah.
exploration.
Yeah, well, you know what? I was so excited when I saw your podcast and,
Mhm,
just the title In the Trenches. And I think right away I was drawn to you and I thought,
mhm.
this is why I wrote my book. I wrote
Yeah,
my book because, you know, when I you really get into the book, I do focus on kids and their mental health, but I also have a chapter on teacher burnout. And I think, it was probably about 10 or so years ago where I started to see kids, coming to school sleep deprived, just struggling with those basic things that, we used to take for granted, right? But the other piece to it was because the behavior was changing, because of the sleep
yeah,
deprivation, because of social media, my teachers were burning out and it hurts the heart, right? Because I'm
yeah.
I'm a relational leader, I'm a servant leader, very organized and structured, but I care about my staff and
Mhm.
and I'm the kind of guy that if a teacher needs photocopying a photocopy, if they look like they need a coffee, I'll go to the staff room and get them a coffee.
Yeah.
I'll do whatever it takes, it just got to a point where I was doing all these workshops. I do workshops around a program called Play is the Way, where you use structured play to teach kids about social emotional learning. And as I do these workshops, more and more I found teachers were crying at the end of the workshops. They're like,
Mhm.
God, I need this. This isn't just for kids, and so that's kind of stemmed my book. I'm like, wow, I really need to dive into what is going on in schools, and I need to, shed some light on
Mhm.
what's happening for our educators, because without our educators, we have nobody, because we are responsible for every profession there is on the planet. We
Mhm.
create the doctors, the lawyers. I mean, kids come and they have passions and whatnot, but
Yeah,
we get them there. We get
yeah.
them to that place where they head off. And I just, I kept seeing teachers retiring earlier. New teachers would come into the system and they'd last 1, 2 years, and they're like, I just want to work half time,
Yeah.
and also, up here in Canada, we don't pay coaches. The coaches have to volunteer to
Oh,
coach
wow.
sports. Yeah, and so, but it was like I coached for 25 years. I coached basketball, I coached swim club, and I never got paid, but I loved it,
Yeah,
and I just finished coaching because my son's graduating and he was my last team I coached. But I can't get I can't get teachers to coach anymore
yeah,
because they're so tired when their days at the end, and they just feel underappreciated, that
yeah.
they don't want to, and they do look down south of the border. It's like, well, they're getting paid down there. But on the
Mhm.
flip side, we do make more money than teachers in the United States for being a teacher, right? So it's apples and oranges,
Yeah,
but it was that whole dynamic of kids were starting to struggle with behavior, struggle with, grit and rigor and perseverance and handling their emotions. And that's why, the behavior's on a rise, because kids are triggered by the tiniest stressors. And you can't challenge kids anymore without a parent saying, you're being mean to my kid,
yeah,
and so there's just this whole dynamic. And then on top of it, parents are struggling because they're both working now. There's not a mom at home who takes care of, the school and the groceries and all that stuff. And there's no breadwinner out there, the father kind of doing that. Both parents have to work or they're not paying the bills. And so it all has kind of just tied in. And that's why I wrote, my first book, Emotional Schools, was to provide a pathway for teachers, for parents, for school districts,
mhm, mhm.
listening superintendents, assistant superintendents. Read the book. It's academic. It's based on research. It's and experience. It's the real deal. And so far it's having an impact. Like, I don't know how big of an impact, but I'm getting more and more phone calls. I'm having more conversations with people like you, Dana, and we're starting to expose the truth. And the truth is that the social emotional well-being of our students and our teachers is suffering.
Yeah, and I think we've seen that for a while. And like you said, I think you hit on some great themes there about the teachers aren't getting respected, both by the students, but also a lot of the parents. Like a lot of the time, like you can't take a kid's cell phone away from them without the parent complaining, right? And a lot of the time, like I had a colleague just this past year where she would send mom a message every time she had to confiscate the kid's phone, and mom got upset about it. And she ended up having to have a meeting with mom and administration. And it's just, some of the times like teachers having to defend why they did what they did when, the use of the cell phone is disrupting class. So yeah, I think, like you said, the emotional intelligence is a big piece of it. So you said you finished writing the book after you changed positions. Was this a project that you've been working on
I
for
had,
quite a while? Okay.
yeah, it was probably about 3 years in the making. I always wanted to write a book of my experiences and the trials and tribulations of being in the trenches. And but the problem was is that I was working in a high school. I was at a high school for 5 years and coaching, and I'm a single dad raising two teenagers.
Yeah.
They are with their mom half time, so half a single dad, I guess you could say. But it's taking my daughter to volleyball, my son to basketball, and coaching. And with technology, you don't get a shut off at 3:30. As a principal, like, and my school isn't huge. There's about 650 kids, 79 staff, but in a night, I'll have 20 people emailing me, plus the district people. And if I didn't wake up at 5 in the morning and get ahead of my emails, the day would be chaotic for the teachers and myself because questions needed to be answered, right? And so because you can't meet with everybody, you get to work at 7:30. By the time the bell rings at 8:30, I can't get to every teacher. And I try to, like, I call myself the king of the cocktail party because I go to class to class. I know teachers want to talk, and then you're interrupting classes, and I'm the kind of guy who stirs the pot and leaves. So it's, but I just couldn't wrap my head around it. And then I moved schools, budget was bigger, staffing is beautiful, small class sizes, and all of a sudden I had time on my hand. I'm like, I need to now finish this and get it out. And I probably within, I'd say 9 or 10 months of being there, I finished the book.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. But I'm telling you, the mental strain of being in the public education system, even here in Canada, it's tough. And it's, whenever I go do a workshop or a presentation, I have the same conversation that I'm having, with you, Dana, here. I had the lady I did the podcast with yesterday in Florida, same thing. And that, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's the same all around the world,
Yeah, so let's dive a little deeper into the role of emotional intelligence in the education system. Why is it important for principals, school leaders in general, and district leaders to address this issue?
Well, because I think if you don't have emotional intelligence, you react poorly. It comes down to as simple as that. If you don't really truly understand what you're feeling in the moment, and if you can't soothe yourself in that moment as an adult and as a kid, you're probably going to make a decision that you're going to regret, whether you're 5 years old, 30 years old, 25, 50. I mean, I've been there, you've been there. When you're feeling emotional or angry or whatnot, you react and you say something that's like, oh shit, can I take that back? And you can't, depending on who you're dealing with, people will label you and then you're stuck. And so emotional intelligence, social emotional learning is so crucial that we teach these skills early, like when kids are in kindergarten, and we teach them all the way to grade 12. And when we teach them, we make sure that we're teaching the adults too, because our adults, I mean, you think of how many adults are doing yoga, mindful practices, trying to, do the Zen stuff, the breathing and all of that. And they're doing it to try to calm, because it's not just kids that have stressors. We do too, right? And so that's why emotional intelligence is so important, because if we don't have it, the decisions that we make oftentimes when we're in the wrong emotional state are going to be negative. And even when you're in you say, I watch a lot of sports, and the coaches talk about, quarterbacks, for example, you don't want to get too high and you don't want to get too low, because if you get too excited, you're going to do things even when you're happy and excited that you shouldn't do. When you're too low, you're going to do things that you shouldn't do when you're angry and frustrated, right? And it's a goal of just kind of keep that even keel, so your decision making is on par, right? And so that's one of the things, I try to do it as a father as well. I mean, back in my early days, I yelled at my kids, I get frustrated, and then I kind of was like, holy, this isn't jiving, you know? And
Yeah.
so you learn that you've got to stay calm and try, and I'm sure, you know, it's hard sometimes because you just want and it's funny, I had lunch with a colleague today, another principal who's still in the district, and
Hmm.
she's just shaking her head. I'm like, hey, what's wrong, Natasha? And she's like, I probably shouldn't have said her name because if people watch this, she's like, it's not the kids. It's not the kids. I said, I know, I
Yeah.
know. And it's, you know, people above you, people that you work for. And every time there's an issue and you work it out, it's like when people are emotional, it just causes stress and it'll domino and
Yeah.
snowball in a school, as you know, and it can create a toxic environment. And then all of a sudden you're going to have a mass exodus, right? So,
Yeah, yeah. And I think like a lot of people who've maybe had more difficult challenges in the past and kind of worked through it, and now they're using these mindfulness techniques and becoming more emotional intelligent. Like you said, you can reflect back on, you know, when you were yelling a lot more at your kids, or a leader might reflect back more on, you know, when the staff was toxic and there was a mass exodus because of maybe the leader not practicing the emotional intelligence. You also wrote a book, And Breathe.
yeah.
What does that have in it?
It's really simple. It's nothing special. It literally took me, I think, what did I say, 4 basketball tournaments and 3 volleyball tournaments because I'm sitting in a hotel room or in the
Yeah.
bleachers. And all it is, it's a book of 50 breathing strategies. And
Hmm.
every breathing strategies are the same. As you take a deep
Hmm.
breath in, you let a deep breath out, right? But when you're talking about, so this is more geared towards elementary kids, but
Hmm.
I have like elevator breathing, flower breathing, pizza breathing, firefighter breathing, dragon breathing. And so
Yeah.
it's just 50 strategies for parents and elementary teachers. And you know what, you can use them with high school kids if you want to, if they might get a kick out of it, you know. Because I know some high school, like the high school I was at, we used that Play is the Way program that I was talking about in the high
Hmm.
school. And there's not a kid alive or an adult who doesn't really like to play the odd game that, you know, brings some laughter, and you got to learn how to breathe. And you know, even if you look at the Navy SEALs, they have a very simple 1, 2, 3, 4 breathing technique, and these guys are going into craziest places in the world, and they breathe to calm. And so if the
Hmm.
toughest people in the world need breathing strategies, well, so do we, right? And so that's what that book is. It's just a really simple book that kind of supplements the emotional schools book, and it goes with the Plays the Way program that I do workshops on and teach about. And so it's great. And you know, the more teachers use the breathing strategies in their classrooms and they help their kids with the breathing strategies when they're feeling emotional, the more the teachers are going to go, oh man, I need to breathe. And when they go home and they lose their keys or whatnot, they'll take some deep breaths and calm themselves down as well.
Hmm. Hmm.
Right.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit about like some of these programs are often used in elementary school, and you've used this at the high school level as well. But in my experience, it tends to fall by the wayside once kids get to middle school. You know, they do have an advisory period. Sometimes there's some curriculum teachers can have access to, but it's not really a school-wide thing. In terms of social emotional learning, what would you say to leaders of secondary schools about the need to continue this definitely in the middle and high school levels?
Well, you know, it's ironic because, you know, I've been to hundreds of professional
Yeah,
development, you know, workshops and stuff, and I can count on my one hand how many I came back and went, this is, you know what, this is going to be great for me. I can embed this in what I do. And the hardest part is that when you come back, it's an add-on. You
yeah,
know, you're already prepping, you're already marking, you're already managing behavior. And it's like, now you want me to add this on? Like, for example,
sure.
you said advisory class, right? And we have advisory classes here, or X blocks, or whatever you want to call them. Every
Yeah.
school calls them something different. And you know, the problem is you don't teach social emotional learning in a block. It has to be
Hmm.
embedded into what you do, right? But you have to teach your staff, and that's what I do is I work with staff to show them when and where and how to embed this stuff. So when you're teaching science, you can embed social emotional learning into everything you do, because it's very simple. You have kids working in a group, for example. Let's say you got, because I was a principal of a middle school, and oh my God, thank God I was only 3 years, because holy man, we're talking hormones, puberty,
Yeah.
probably the toughest place to work, right? And you know, you think about kids in a group and they start being silly and they're not being sensible. And there's a common language you can use, like, hey, you guys are being
Mhm.
silly. What should you be doing? Oh, we should be being sensible. Great. Okay. Hey, I'm noticing that you guys are being a little bit intense and let's just stop for a second. Take a deep breath. Let's just chill. And you use language like that. Let's chill. Let's relax. Let's take some deep breaths. Say, okay, get back to your lesson. That takes 30 seconds out of your time rather
Mhm.
than ignoring it, right? And just saying, hey, you guys cut it out or use proxemics and you go stand close to the desk. And then next thing you know, you got a kid in the hallway and you're out in the
Yeah.
hallway for 5 minutes instead of taking 10 seconds to say, whoa, hey, you guys are being silly instead of sensible. Because in this place, I have there's key concepts that go with
Mhm.
it. And if you have it school wide, all the kids can recognize the self mastery checklist, which asks them the questions: Am I doing the right or the wrong thing? Am I being strong or am I being weak in my decision making? Am I being my own boss or is somebody else needing to be my boss? And you can say, look at that purple poster. Can you answer those questions? And they can look up at it and go, oh, you're about to be my boss. And no kid wants their principal or teacher to be their boss because it means they're out in the
Mhm.
hallway, going to the principal's office. And so when it comes to social emotional learning, it's not a matter of, hey, let's sit down at a carpet and for 45 minutes, let's discuss this, that, and the other thing, right?
Yeah.
It's about when you see something coming up, right? I mean, how many times have you told somebody to relax and it backfired on you, right? And it's about when a situation arises, like, hey guys, let's take a minute here. I think we all
Mhm.
need to take a deep breath. Let's shake it off. Let's regroup. Okay, let's get back to our social project. Or you see a kid, you know, those perfectionists where they're doing their math or whatever,
Yeah.
and they don't like it. They crumple up their paper and then throw it in the garbage, right? You know
Yeah.
that one, right?
Mhm.
And it's like, whoa, whoa, hey, it's okay. Let's just take a deep breath. And you got to give the kid a few minutes, walk away, take
Mhm.
a deep breath. Okay, we're good. How can I simplify this for you? How can I make this
Mhm.
better so that you can get through this? And then you kind of build up that intrinsic, you know, motivation and that grit and perseverance. And I think that's the problem, is that we're so prone to wanting to add these programs onto everything that we do, create a class for it. Let's, you know, instead of just teaching teachers to recognize when there's an emotional dysregulated person in their classroom, you know. And
Mhm.
if you start very early with kids, teaching them the self-soothing techniques and the self-regulation techniques as they progress up the chain, it's very simple to say to a kid, it's like, hey, you seem like you're a bit emotional, you seem like you're a bit angry or you're a bit sad or whatnot. And you do want to teach the emotional pieces of emotions too, so kids truly understand. And I have a whole chapter on teaching to that. But
Mhm.
again, you can teach that stuff when a principal has an assembly, or if you do have, you know, 5 or 10 minutes, it's like you can come in and you can say, holy man, you know, because I tell personal stories in my class, and I'm sure you do.
Mhm.
If you walk in and just say, holy, I was ticked this weekend. When
Mhm.
I was angry because somebody cut me off. I had to take some deep breaths, and man, this is what I felt. And you can just have that
Mhm.
conversation, then let it go. Don't ask them to write anger on a piece of paper and define it, but have conversations or say, hey, you know what?
Mhm.
We went to some friend's house and man, we laughed and laughed. And I was there. I just felt this jubilation and this, you know, and this is what I felt. And then you let it go. Right.
Mhm.
And then next thing you know, when you're having conversations and you see kids who are being overly boisterous or angry, it's like, hey, remember the story I told you? It looks like you're in the same boat. Remember how I told you I took some deep breaths? Let's take some deep breaths.
Mhm. Mhm.
Right. And then you just, you know, the people that jumped on it the most in the high school that I was at were my senior science teachers, my
Mhm.
senior math teachers, because test anxiety was massive. Because these kids who are in those senior math and senior science kids,
Mhm.
those kids are typically going off into university, become doctors and architects,
Mhm.
and it's highly competitive, right? So these kids are stressing over a 93 instead of a 94, and
Yeah.
I gotta get, you know, and so these teachers grabbed on, just like, I need something to calm these kids down before they write a test, because I have kids they're breaking out in hives before
Mhm.
a test, right? And so it was very easy, and ironically, it was the senior serious teachers that really, you know, grabbed a hold of the social emotional learning, and it became part of what we did. It was just what we did. We walked down the hallway. If we seen somebody sad, you know, sad or upset, we kind of stop, use your proxemics and say, hey, how you doing? Everything okay? And then just kind of model that, just like, it's a rough day, hey? And take another,
Mhm.
and don't even tell them you're doing it. And all of a sudden, they're going to notice that you're breathing and they may end up doing it. And it's just habit forming, right? And
Yeah.
that's what I would tell principals and school districts is that it has to become something that's habit forming, but you have to give teachers the tools to do that. You can't just expect a teacher to all of a sudden be these self-regulation kings or queens and and that's what I do. I go and do these workshops, or I do, keynote presentations and stuff, and I talk about these things, and I help school districts and educators get there, because at the end of the day, you can go do, I know you were just at a technology conference, you can go do an assessment conference, you can do a grading conference, you can do whatever, but at the end of the day, if your kids are not in control of their emotions, their academics are going to drop.
Yeah.
And if they are in control of their emotions, all of a sudden that intrinsic motivation increases, grit increases, resilience increases, perseverance increases, because they're emotionally stable. And and your academic success is gonna increase. And that's why I'm a firm believer in the core to student success, academic success, is emotional intelligence.
Yeah, there's a lot there to break down in terms of
A
just
lot.
like, I think that piece about the test anxiety, like, especially like you experience those seniors, but in Colorado, for example, we have, our spring standardized test, and it's from grade 3 to ninth grade, and then they have, the PSAT and the SAT and 10th and 11th. But when it comes that time of year, and all the teachers feel stressed out, right? Because they're, the school's expected to score higher than they did the previous
Are
year.
you guys evaluated based on those results too?
So we're evaluated, it depends on the district in Colorado, but some districts are evaluated based on student learning outcomes, but not tied to the standardized test anymore. It used to be.
Yeah, that's too bad. I know we used to have we don't have SATs here, or is it CAT or
PSAT is a pre-SAT.
Oh, okay, so that's what it is. Yeah, because my son was getting some offers to play ball down south, and he was gonna have to do SATs, and there was this book about this thick. I'm like, he's like, holy, I'm like, because we don't do that here, and our kids are very bright. Like we make sure, like in British Columbia, we changed our curriculum so it's a more of a competency based, a core competency based model, where you're looking at creative and critical thinking, collaboration, communication, because we're trying to develop kids who are going to be business leaders and can think and be in a meeting and do those things, right? And then there's the curricular competencies too, like socials, math, English, science, where you have all those things. But we put a lot of emphasis on creativity and critical thinking, and our kids, man, they can go, right? It doesn't mean we don't have issues, but we're not wrapped around this teaching to a test thing that it seems like permeates the United States, right? We follow a different model. I was actually just watching a documentary in Japan, and how they don't do any kind of testing until grade 4 or 5, because they want to teach character, and they want to teach that emotional well-being, and their their educational system is ranked very high worldly, right? And I think that's one of the things that we do here in Canada, British Columbia. We do look at other systems to see what's working and not working. Of course, that's when the union and the government can get along and come together, which is another difficult thing. But yeah.
No, but I think that's a great idea to have teachers be able to use those soothing strategies with kids, and help them get used to it. Form those habits with your students, not only around the high stakes testing, but also when they're doing just regular unit assessments and those types of things. But like you said, it doesn't need to be an advisory class. It doesn't need to be a certain time of day. It's built into the teaching.
Yeah, well, and I think that's the key too, right? I don't know about you, but experiential learning is so important. So is discovery learning, and it's like, my son, he's upstairs, and he'll probably hear this, but my son was one of those kids where it's like, don't touch the stove, it's hot. Don't touch the stove, it's hot. He didn't learn until he touched the stove. And it's the same thing with the social emotional well-being. It's like when you try to teach it to a bunch of calm kids sitting on a carpet, it's like, okay, take a deep breath, in and out, which is great. But when they're feeling it, when they're feeling that anxiety or that frustration, that's when you want to teach it. And that's why the program that I use, the Play is the Way program, I use that is because you use play to elicit those emotions. And then you elicit just enough that you can see kids kind of, because you play, like, I don't know about you, but I play crib and Yahtzee, and I play physical games too. And I can feel my emotions get intense as soon as it gets competitive. And so we use that play piece to teach, to get emotional. And it's like, okay, whoa, like I was telling you about the example of the social kids and working in a group, right? You use that piece to kind of elicit those emotions. Like, okay, well, I feel it. Starting to feel like you guys are getting a little bit frustrated. And when we feel frustrated, we start doing silly things. So let's take some deep breaths. Let's bring it back down. So you always trying to catch and you try to teach that self-soothing breathing stuff when kids are actually feeling emotional. The trick though is to catch them at, like when I say elicit emotion, you want to elicit it so you catch it at the right time. Because if they get to the point where they flip their lid, well, then you're going to have a different situation with violent or aggressive kids. But and over time, if you keep kind of pushing those emotional, eliciting those emotions and you keep pushing it incrementally, you're going to have kids getting more and more resilient to understanding what they're feeling emotionally. So even in your social studies class, right? Sometimes, you know what, if you get kids where they're pretty calm and it's going for 23 minutes, it's like, wow, this class is too good. Throw a wrench into the mix and get them heighten their emotions. And it's crazy to think, why would you do that?
Yeah.
Well, you do it because it's like, well, I want to throw it off. It's because now all of a sudden they raise emotions. It's like, okay, guys, we're getting a little too intense. Let's take some deep breaths. Let's focus and bring it back. And some people are going to think, why would you be crazy enough to ruin a class where the kids are quiet, they're working, talking nicely, 25, 30 minutes and do it? You do it because you want that experiential learning. You want that experience-based learning, right? So that's the key. And that's why it has to be embedded and it can't be an add-on. And that's the main thing. It has to be embedded or teachers are done. And I don't blame them.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about people who are looking to get into leadership, aspiring principals or assistant principals. If they're already a person who's passionate about supporting students' mental health and well-being, but maybe they took a job in a district that doesn't necessarily support it as much, or they're facing pushback from the culture in the school that they took over. What are some things that you would advise them?
Well, I guess it depends on the situation because I've been moved to many schools when the environment's been toxic and whatnot. But I think the biggest thing that I would suggest to a new leader going into either it's a district or a school, the first thing I would do is I would have that leader go in and have one-to-ones, have a one-to-one conversation with the cook, with the custodian, with the bus drivers, with the special education assistants, with the teachers. Don't have a big staff meeting and say, tell me what's going on, where you put the charts up on the wall and everybody, because then you'll just take the toxicity and it'll just get exploded. But if you take a couple of weeks when you first get to a school and you sit down and say, hey, tell me what's going on for you, right? And what you'll see is you can create your own chart and you'll start seeing trends and you'll start seeing holes and where the despair is and where the struggles are. And then that's when you can kind of devise a plan with your leadership committee or within a staff and say, hey, I met with all, and when you walk into a staff meeting, say, hey, I met with all of you individually, it gives everyone a voice because you know how it works in a staff meeting. If there's 50 people, there's always 3 people who are the loudest. And then there's 20 people who just sit there and they don't say a word, and then there's kind of another 20 people in the middle who might say the odd thing, but they don't want to rock the boat, right? And so when you come back at it saying, hey, I met with every individual and this is what I got out of it. And this is troublesome for me. So how do I help? And you throw it back at them. So how do I help you with this? What are some solutions? And you throw back at them. We're looking at solutions. We're looking at coming at this from a positive framework. We're not coming at this from a complaining, because we can sit here and complain about all this all day long, but what's our solution? And and if it involves money from the district and stuff like that, that's out of our hands. And right away I put in there, okay, we're not getting more money from the district. They're not giving us more staffing. Parents aren't going to change. So what can we do with what we have to make the difference, to at least chip away and do 1 or 2 of these things and focus on 1 or 2 or 3 of these things for the first semester. And then if we can get there, the next few things. And then, I always tell new leaders, whenever you're going into a school that's toxic, it's going to take 1 to 3 years to change it, depending on how well you form relationships with the staff, how well you use that servant leadership, how organized and structured you are. And within 1 to 3 years, you can see a change on a staff if they're willing to move forward. Sometimes you run into a situation where you just have teachers who are ingrained and stuck in a situation, and you may have to say to them, hey, why don't you go to another school because we're moving forward? Or the staff will get together and say, hey, listen, we need to move forward, right? But you have to have staff believe in you first. And that's why I say 1 to 3 years. It depends on the toxicity. If a staff is eager and they're dying to have great leadership to move forward, you'll get there within, 12 to 18 months. But if it's not, where it's a little more troublesome and it's going to take a little extra relationship building, it'll take up to 3 years. But then the district can't come in year 1.5 and pull the principal out who's doing a great job and move them somewhere else. Because then you're just back to square one, right? So, but that's the main thing. It just comes back to relationships and showing teachers that you're willing to grab a shovel and dig with them, and then of course you have to organize and structure your building properly, because if you're not organized, teachers will murder you, because teachers are very organized. And if you come in and you're just this flighty leader and communication is poor and whatnot, oh boy, you're just going to shoot yourself in the foot, right? So
yeah, good advice for people who, maybe going into a situation that they're not quite sure of, or they're discovering things a few months into the school year when this is being released, and want to make sure that they put the staff on the right foot moving forward, but some strategies, right? Like you said, it's not a quick fix, but really
and don't walk in like you have all the answers as a leader. Man, that kills staff right away, because right away, as soon as you walk in, it's like, we're going to do this, that, and the other, because I've been doing this for 20 years, and you don't listen to your teachers right away. They're going to think, we've been in the trenches too, dude. We know what's going on. We know what's happening. You got to involve teachers in the process, right? Like, you can't come in with that ego and that narcissism and, or being overly confident. You can be overly confident, but keep it to yourself and work with your staff, or you're going to lose them too. That's the other thing, right?
That's great. Well, we've had a great conversation today around emotional intelligence, your book, Emotional Schools, some of your work in your previous district and your current school. Out of everything we've talked about today, what's one thing you'd like listeners to remember?
Well, if it's teachers that are listening mostly, I'm assuming, Dana.
Both teachers and leaders.
Both teachers and leaders. I would tell them that if you're in a toxic place that's not going to change, leave. We're at a time now. I remember first started off in education, I'd apply for a job and 30 other people were applying. So I had to take what I could take, but there's a teacher shortage. And if you don't have a family that you have to pack up and move to go to a new school, and if you're in a bigger center, put your ear to the ground and listen to where the good leaders are, or the good school districts are. Because I know in Vancouver, BC, there's like 5 or 6 or 7 school districts within an hour of each other. So you can, even if you're a principal or an assistant superintendent or whatever, you can leave a school district and go to another one if a job opens up, right? Follow the good leadership if you can't make the change. And I think it's the same thing for teachers. Do not sit in a toxic situation year after year after year, because your mental health matters. It really matters. Your personal well-being. Like, you don't want to get to the end of your career at 55 and 60 and be completely exhausted and just have no life left in you, and I think that's the biggest thing, is that we're working at a time now. We don't have to put up with this shit. We don't have to. We can pack our bags and say, you know what, that school down the road, they got some good things happening. The staff is happy. The principal seems like she's happy. The district's running. I'm going over there. Thank you, but no thank you. And that's my advice. I think, mental health is for everybody. Like when I wrote that book, like I said, there's a chapter on teacher burnout, and there's a lot of stuff around kids, but it's for everybody in school. And so that would be my message. Don't tolerate it if you have the opportunity to go.
Yeah, that's so important. And I think it's a message that needs to be heard. And, this podcast episode might be coming out in October, but I think, even if you have to leave mid-year, if you find something, a place is going to be better, or if it's the best time for you to leave, I know there are more teachers that decide that at, non-traditional times during the school year. And, it's not always the best for a teacher to hold out the whole school year either. So
it's not, and we don't have to. We do not have to, especially if you're in a bigger center where you have access. For me, myself, like I'm in a small town and I would have to pack up my family and move my whole house an hour away. So I'm kind of stuck, and I just happen to have an opportunity pop up. But if you're in a position where you don't have to move your family out of your house or move yourself, and you can add 10 minutes to your drive, or take off 10 minutes to your drive, do it.
Well, where can people connect with you and find you online?
People can go to my website, www.leroyslanzi.com. If they're interested in the Play is the Way program, they can go to www.playistheway.ca, or you can just email me at leroyslanzi@gmail.com. It's that simple. And I'm looking to go down into the States to do workshops and professional development down there this year. It'll be the first time heading on there, but like I said, my son's done playing basketball. My daughter's a senior, so I have more time I'm not coaching, so I have more time to head south um, and start working with Americans. I think it'll be great. But reach out. I do coaching too. I do leadership and teacher coaching and parent coaching and all of that stuff. So if anybody's looking to are curious, just throw me an email. There's no charge for an email. I'll have a dialogue with somebody just to see where it goes. And then if somebody wants me to bring me to Colorado to do Plays the Way, I'll come on down there and I'll do that with you guys.
Well, thank you so much for being my guest on the Out of the Trenches podcast. It was a pleasure hearing more about your work and your passions.
Yeah, you know what, Dana, thank you. And good luck, because you're going back to school soon, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I've got 1.5 days left and then I'm off for a couple months. So I'm just about to hit summer holidays.